know it's a small group, but we got to wake up. Let's try that again. Good morning. There we go. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Sacred Tales concert. As always, I'm super excited about the tellers we've got this year. And is anyone new to our Sacred Tales concert? Okay, I'm going to explain. We do some things a little different. Probably one of the greatest compliments I ever got was from Catherine Tucker Wyndham, who told me that I emceed concerts right because her philosophy was, shut up and get off the stage, you're wasting my story time. So I introduce you to all the storytellers at the beginning, and then they come up one by one to tell their stories so as not to interrupt the beautiful momentum that they create. So our 5 storytellers for today are Darci Tucker, who went last night from being honorary Texan to official full-fledged Texan by winning the John Henry Falk Award last night. And then our next teller is Rebekah Deans, who, thrilling moment for Jean and I, we happened to meet her when she was living in East Texas with little kids, and she brought them to come hear us tell at the library. And she just happened to mention to us, do y'all know who Catherine Tucker Wyndham is? Found out she grew up at the knee of Catherine, telling stories in Alabama. And we're blessed to now have her as a Texan. And then Stephen Schwartz, who has one of the coolest jobs ever. He designs storytelling collaborative games called Schwartz Games. I mean, how cool is that? Storytelling and gaming all in one. And then we have Liz Weir, who everybody already knows. And then the last teller is going to be someone new for, I imagine, most of you. Her name is Amy Martin. If you are a trail walker in Dallas, you probably have her books on her shelf. Her latest one is Wild DFW, introducing you to all the nature trails in the DFW area. She truly is Dallas's nature goddess. And so I am excited to be introducing her to y'all today. So let's get our concert started. So for our first teller, Darci Tucker.
Thanks. So how many of you have ever heard the term God wink? Okay, for those of you who haven't, a God wink is one of those moments when something is just so coincidental, it's clearly not coincidental. It's clearly God saying, I see you, I gotcha. I grew up, as some of you may have heard last night, in the wrong place. I spent my whole childhood begging to be sent to an East Coast boarding school because California just did not fit me. I wanted to wear plaid skirts and sweater sets, and I was living in a flannel shirt and pickup truck kind of a town. It just didn't fit. So my parents said, of course, no, I could not go to an East Coast boarding school. And then when it was time for college, no, I could not go to college. But while I was in college, we took a cross-country trip and went to Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. Any of you ever been there? So Williamsburg was the capital of Virginia when it was a British colony. And I was instantly transfixed. I knew that that was where I was supposed to be. So as soon as I graduated from college, I got in my car and I drove cross country. And I'm picturing what was in my car. I had an antique trunk in my car. It was a Honda Accord, but I've packed in an antique trunk and an antique chair and all this stuff that made me feel like I lived back in time. And I got a job as a historical interpreter, wearing 18th century clothing to work every day and taking kids on tours through the town, and I absolutely loved it. I got married, and we bought a house in York County, Virginia, which is Williamsburg, half of Williamsburg. So back then, being a Colonial Williamsburg employee, it was a lot of fun. They used to have a lot of employee parties and that, intramural sports and stuff that have kind of gone by the wayside. But one of the parties that happened every year was a Guy Fawkes party. Now, Guy Fawkes actually led an attempt to blow up the British Parliament in 1605. And to this day, in much of the British world, they still celebrate Guy Fawkes Day by burning Guy Fawkes in effigy. And so every November 5th at Colonial Williamsburg, we'd have a Guy Fawkes party and have an effigy and burn it and, drink. And so when Terry and I decided to get married, we got married in California so that my family could all easily be there. But we wanted to have a Guy Fawkes party when we got home so that all of our Williamsburg friends could be there. And I had gone to the Costume Design Center and asked them if they had any old clothes that I could burn to make an effigy of Guy Fawkes. And they gave me some men's clothes, and life happens, and somehow that party never happened. But I had folded up the clothes and I stuck them in a dresser, and the dresser ended up out in the garage, and I forgot all about that. So years went by, but I continued to be head over heels in love with Colonial Williamsburg, and I worked my way up to a boring desk job. I was eventually a supervisor, and all my employees were having all the fun, and so I decided I'd try fundraising, development. They had an opening, and that would mean traveling around the country and getting to talk about, how wonderful the place is. And so I took this job in development. I don't have the right personality I do for the donors, but not for the people that are in that field of work, apparently. It was the worst year and a half of my life. It was really bad. I think I was working on an ulcer. And my immediate supervisor despised me. And I began to realize she was going to fire me. It just dawned on me little by little, and I knew it was going to happen. And eventually, they had a meeting, and they called all 5 of us who had been hired together one at a time to come in, and I was the last one, and each person came out, and I said, "What happened?" And they said, "Well, these are my goals for the next year." And I walked in, and they said, "Either resign or you'll be fired." And my world collapsed, because Colonial Williamsburg was my world. I had left everyone and everything I'd ever known to work for the place. I had blood, sweat, and tears, it was my identity. So I went back to my office, and I called my husband, and I said, "This just happened to me." And he said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, but I've got to work tonight. And I'm going to McDonald's for dinner, so why don't we meet at McDonald's?" And that's the best I can do, because I have to work. So at McDonald's, I step up to the counter, and a young lady behind the counter, we used to go to McDonald's a lot. I'd never seen her before. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "I just had a really bad day." And she said, "You need ice cream." And she turned around and made me an ice cream cone and handed it to me. No charge. Tears. So Terry went off to work. I got home, and I thought, okay, I know you're not supposed to just open up the Bible and look for the answer, but I don't know what else to do right now. So I said, "God, what the heck just happened?" And I randomly opened the Bible and 1 Samuel 29. Here's the scenario. The Israelites are going to go to war, and I don't remember who it's all with, right? But they're the backup team for, I think, could it be the Philistines? It could be. I don't know. They're the backup team for a group that's about to go off to war. But those people go to their king, and they say, we don't like David. We're not going to fight if he comes along. Tell him he's got to go. So the king goes to David and says, sorry, you got to go. And David says, what did I do? And the king says, you did nothing wrong. They just don't like you. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I thought, well, so do I keep reading? Do I push my luck? Well, I kept reading. So everyone's angry at David because they were all hyped up to go to war, and now they got to go home instead. They go back home. They get there just in time to find out that this was probably the Philistines, had captured all of their families and their livestock and had taken them away. And if David hadn't been fired, they would not have gotten home in time to chase the Philistines down and rescue their families. So I thought, okay, God's telling me, it's okay. It's going to be okay. So the next day, I'm cleaning out my office, carrying boxes out, insult to injury. I got a parking ticket while I was clearing out my office. And then my mom calls me and says, Grandma had a stroke. If you want to see her alive, you better come now. So I dropped everything, flew to Arizona. I spent 3 weeks by her bedside. Grandma recovered. She lived another 3 years. And while I was sitting by her bedside, I was thinking about what am I going to do now that I'm unemployed? And I began writing Revolutionary Women, the play that has become my bread and butter that I've performed 800 or more times over the last 25 years. And then I began thinking about that 1 Samuel, and I realized, no, it wasn't just God saying everything's going to be okay. It was God literally saying, I'm freeing you up from a job so you can go rescue your family. So you can sit at your grandmother's bedside and help your mother move her into a smaller apartment. It was literal. So I get back to Virginia, and I'm thinking, how am I going to put this play together? What am I going to do for costuming? And fortunately, I was going to play 3 different characters, one of whom disguised herself as a man, Deborah Sampson, and fought for 1.5 years before she was caught. So I thought, what am I going to do for costuming? And I'm looking through all the costuming that I have, and I've got all kinds of women's clothes, and I'm thinking, well, I can put a man's hat on with my women's clothes, and I have the urge to go out and clean the garage. And I open up a dresser drawer, and there's a suit of men's clothes. The Guy Fawkes clothes. And I thought, great, I can dress the kids. I can have fashion shows and dress the kids. 2 or 3 days goes by before it dawns on me, maybe you should try those clothes on. They fit. 12 years before I got fired, God gave me the clothes I was going to need to start this career. And to this day, that experience is very painful, but it's one of those like Joel was talking about, is it a blessing or is it a curse? Colonial Williamsburg for me was like the right pair of shoes, but a half a size off. It just wasn't exactly right. I never would have left. I had to get kicked out the door, but because I got kicked out the door, I've spent the 26 happiest years of my life traveling the country, educating children, getting to know all of you here in Texas, all of that. And it was all obviously planned because there were God winks every step of the way.
recording? How are you? I'm just putting it here. Thank you. Good morning. So I'm going to admit that I'm getting ready to do something that every one of you in here would say, no, Rebekah, don't do it, not now. But I just believe the time is right. I'm pretty sure you all are very familiar with this tune, so you can just sing along or hum along, okay? Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Oh, Lord, come by here. Now, I wasn't around, obviously, when my mother was born, 1944, to her 45-year-old mother. Grandma had lived through quite a bit. And I imagine that Grandma somehow instilled, I'll call it the gift of praying, into her baby girl. Mama was the youngest of the 7 that lived to be adults. And I imagine that Grandma somehow instilled in her that everything will be all right, because by that time, Grandma had lived through World War, 2 World Wars, Great Depression, in Jim Crow South, Alabama. Times were hard. Grandma didn't even know how to read or write, but she was raising a family. I imagine that as my mother was growing up and seeing the hardships of living in Dallas County, Alabama. If you're not familiar with it, Selma, Alabama is the county seat, if that tells you anything. And I just imagine that somehow she started to put those prayers, that skill, that art of praying into practice. Her prayers are probably pretty long because a lot of the challenges that she and her family faced were pretty long and pretty hard. Now, Mom happened to avoid the cotton picking, and that was simply because she would pass out in the fields from heat exhaustion, and her siblings said, Mama, just let her go to school. So she went to school. She was the only one of the 7 that lived to be adults to graduate high school, and she graduated as a valedictorian of her class at Tyler Union High School. And then she went on to attend Selma University, a historically black college and university in Selma, Alabama. Not really sure to this day why they call it a university. At that time, it was only a 2-year college, and you could only graduate with an associate's degree. There is where she met my father. And somehow they met and they chose each other for life. They married, and they married right after they graduated, 1965, moved to his hometown of Troy, Alabama, 100 miles away. And Mom worked while my father finished his bachelor's degree at Alabama State University. He finished in August, and I was born in November of that year. Thanksgiving Day, the absolute worst day to graduate for Alabama State Hornet, because that's the big game between Alabama State and Tuskegee. And I imagine he had to miss it. 17 hours of labor, I'm pretty sure she was not going to say, oh yeah, go ahead and go to the game. But then, Back then you stayed in the hospital for about a week. And turns out my birth was actually pretty hard. I was sleeping just like Mama, with my arm behind my head. And I turned into the birth canal with my arm behind my head. My elbow, my shoulder, and my head were all trying to come at once. In Jim Crow, South Alabama, there were only a few options of hospitals that Mama could go to. There were only a few options of doctors that she could go to. And the one that was recommended to her was a family medicine doctor, not an OBGYN. Can you imagine 17 hours of labor, Thanksgiving night, and he's faced with this? It's not his specialty. He turned me around, stopped me from coming, turned me around, pulled my arm down, and decided we're not going to risk turning her again. So I was born breech. I acknowledge my quirks, and if any of you have ever questioned my quirks, you now know. Thanksgiving night, 17 hours of labor, sleeping like this, and born breech. There you have it. But this was also at a time where they weren't doing a whole lot of anesthesia. So Mama just had to endure this. And I just imagine somewhere in the midst of that, she may not have had the strength to sing it, but maybe she just hummed. Somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Oh, Lord, come by here. At the end of that week, she went to stay with my father's brother and his wife. My Uncle James was a local pastor, and he lived in the parsonage nearby in Montgomery, Alabama. Stayed there for a week, and then we went home to Troy. According to Mama, when I was about 2 weeks old, and if you're doing the math, when I was about 2 weeks old, my father decided he didn't want that life. He didn't want to be a husband and a father anymore. Can you imagine? She's 100 miles away from home. At this time, speed limit was 55 miles per hour. Mama came from a sharecropping family, so this was not a family that could just hop on the road in the car that they didn't have to come pick up their daughter 100 miles away. She worked so he could finish, but all she had was an associate's degree. This was also during a time where, society was playing games with African Americans. You either were not qualified enough, in her case with an associate's degree, not qualified enough, or maybe you had a bachelor's degree and you were overqualified. Some way, somehow, you didn't get employment. But Mama had to figure it out. He didn't move right away. He stayed for a very short time, but by the time I was 6 months old, he decided that was it. And so there she is in Troy, Alabama, no family around with a 6-month-old baby, an associate's degree, and trying to figure out what she's going to do. But some way, somehow, she pulled herself together. Thankfully, my father's family stayed in the game and helped to support her. I spent much of my time around people who were old enough to be my great-grandparents, because all of my grandparents were, that I was able to meet in my lifetime. They were old enough to be my great-grandparents. And all of my father's first cousins were old enough to be either my grandparents or great-grandparents, because he was the youngest grandchild. But they stepped in to help. And she managed to finish her bachelor degree and go on and get employment there in Pike County. And eventually, she worked there for a while. I remember when she was learning to cook. And I remember when she was learning to drive. And one of the times that she was driving, we lived on a hill. If you've never been to Troy, Alabama, Troy has very steep hills and very deep valleys. And we lived at the top of a hill. She was learning to drive, and she was driving her friend's car. As we were coming down the hill, when we got to the bottom and she hit the brakes, the car didn't stop. And we went straight across, bam, into a telegram pole on the other side. Her head hit the windshield, glass went everywhere. This was during a time that we didn't have to wear seatbelts. So not only was I not wearing a seatbelt, I was standing up in the back, hugging the passenger seat. I managed to maintain my grip around that passenger seat and not be seriously injured. I just had the weirdest little injury on the top of my foot, but Mama ripped her finger open when she snatched the emergency brake, and glass was all in her hair. And she had hair that was down her back, so it was just hair everywhere. Glass everywhere. But she healed from that eventually and moved on. She eventually got another car, and through some kind of drama, someone came and just destroyed the locks on that car. But then she eventually got another more sporty car. And we liked that car so much. And she would go back and forth to Selma or Dallas County as much as she could to go and visit with family. And we enjoyed that trip. 55 miles per hour would take us 2 hours each way. But those were fun times to me. I would ride. I was young enough that I remember I could not see over the edge of the doorway. All I could see was out of the glass. And so I would look up, and we would play this game, and I would say, "Oh, Mama, I see an elephant." And she'd say, "You do?" And I said, "Yeah." And she would ask me, "Where is it?" And I said, "There it is. You see the duck? Okay, go over from there. You see the elephant now?" And she would say, "Yeah, I see it." And we would play that game so many times, back and forth to Dallas County. And then there was this one time that we were going, and when Mama made that left-hand turn off of US 231 North onto US 80 West, it was downpouring, raining. But it seemed like Mama decided she was going to have fun. And she turned that corner, and the car went shoo, and shoo, shoo. And I was saying, wee, because I thought Mama was playing a game, and she looked at me very seriously, and she said, baby. And she put out the mama hand, the mama seatbelt, and she held me in place and trying to hold that car steady. And then we went across the grassy area. I could only tell some of it because, again, I couldn't really see over the door, but I knew we weren't still going straight like we had been. And we crossed over, and then I could see vehicles coming toward us because there was a big 18-wheeler, and it was up high enough that I could see it. And thankfully, he saw us, and I guess was able to stop. And then all of a sudden, I heard Mama yell, "Jesus!" And the car stopped. Now, Mama had prayed a lot of prayers in front of me, some of them long, some of them I obviously don't remember really, but I imagine she prayed fervently when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated a few months after I was born. And I imagine that she was heartbroken just a month later when her cousin, who was brought up with her like a sibling, was murdered in Vietnam. And I imagine when I was 6 months old, which was right around that time, but when I actually hit the 6-month mark and my father decided to leave, I imagine she prayed fervently, long prayers, about what she was going to do next. And somewhere along the way, she learned maybe to shorten those prayers, because I remember Mama told me, the shortest prayer that you need to pray is, Lord, help. And so sometimes when I would have troubles, that's what I would pray. Lord, help. But you know what? The most effective prayer that Mama ever prayed in my life was, Jesus! Because it stopped cars. Somebody's praying, Lord, come by here. Somebody's praying, Lord, come by here. Somebody's praying, Lord, come by here. Oh, Lord, come by here. Many of you have prayed. You know about my mom. You've met my mom. She was here last year with me, if you remember. And I thank you for all of the prayers that you have prayed for her. On March 4th of 2026, she did just that. She marched forth into eternity. And I thank you.
Thank you, Rebekah. That was awesome. We're poor little lambs who have lost our way. Ba, ba, ba. If you could talk with someone who's passed on to the other world, who would it be? And what would you say to them? The story I'm going to share with you today is a true story that absolutely convinced me that there is an afterlife. Dad, let's go to Grandma and Grandpa's house. That was me, bouncing on the front seat of my dad's station wagon bench seat car, and I was so anxious to go visit my grandparents and romp around on their farm and visit with my Uncle Charles, who lived upstairs in their white wood frame home. When I'd get there, I'd rush out and go into the arms of my grandmother. She would hold me, and she'd rock me in her rocking chair, that old wooden rocking chair. I can still hear it creaking on the linoleum floor, her gray hair gathered up in a bun, and the faint smell of coffee on her breath as she would sing to me, Grandma, let's go to the chicken coop. I want to feed the chickens. I'd reach my hands down into the metal bucket of corn and grain, and those chickens, they knew what was coming. They would be all around me, and as I threw it on the ground, it sounded like 1,000 mini jackhammers on that concrete floor as they would eat it. But that wasn't my favorite place to go. It was the back porch, where I knew I'd find my Uncle Charles. He'd be smoking a cigarette, because my grandparents wouldn't let him smoke in the house. Stevie, come here, go get me a drink of well water. Well, I was a little kid, and I had 1,000 questions, and I didn't have the same filter as an adult. Uncle Charles, why are you living here with Grandma and Grandpa? Well, you see, your Aunt Millie and me, well, we got a divorce, and yeah. But why, Uncle Charles? Well, I guess she couldn't put up with my drinking. Say, where's my well water? Every once in a while, my dad would come back into that back porch, and he and my Uncle Charles would talk about their youth, and they would reminisce about World War II. Occasionally, they'd get arm in arm, and they'd sing their favorite song, the Whiffin' song. We're poor little lambs who have lost our way. Ba, ba, ba. Gentlemen songsters on a spree, doomed from here to eternity. Lord, have mercy on such as we. Ba, ba, ba. From, let me show you how to throw a curveball, to, come here, Steve, I'll teach you how to drive my car. It seems my Uncle Charles, well, it seems I had become the son he never had. Now, every weekend, because my grandparents didn't have running water, he would drive his white Oldsmobile down to our house, and he would take a shower. And he would visit with my mother's father, Grandpa Keener, who lived in an adjoining apartment. They would sit and watch the baseball games, and they would drink a beer. It soon became that he was part of our family. One weekend night, we got a knocking on the door. It was a furious knock. It woke everybody up. It was a firefighter, and he said, "Is that your white Oldsmobile down the street? It's all burned up." My dad said, "No, that's probably Uncle Charles's. Was there anybody killed?" "Well, no, we didn't see any human remains, but it's totally gone." Hearing that, I rushed over to my grandfather's apartment. I was scared, and there he was, passed out on the couch, drunk. The next morning, he was nursing a hangover, and he and I walked down to his car, or what was left of it. It was totally gutted, and he explained how he was driving, and he ran off the road and got stuck in the ditch, and the next thing he knew, there were flames and heat coming out of the dashboard. But the one thing that was left in that car was the glove compartment. He opened it up and he reached in and he pulled out a brass sheep bell. And he said, "Stevie, I want to give you this. It belonged to my Uncle Gene. It meant a lot to him, and it means a lot to me. Would you have it?" Well, sure, Uncle Charles. I was genuinely thankful, but I thought that's an odd gift to give me. Now, don't lose it. So I graduated high school, and I went into college, and I did a lot of things that would help me understand my Uncle Charles. But when I look back at it, that was just the point when things started to go wrong. You see, things started to catch up with my Uncle Charles. "Steve, would you come with me to the VA hospital? Your Uncle Charles, he's got lung cancer, and he's been asking for you. He really wants to see you." "No, Dad, I don't want to see him after all the things that he's done." We got calls from Al's bar in the middle of the night. My grandmother would call and say, "Is Charles there? He didn't come home last night." I could hear the worry in her voice, and I could envision the tears running down her face. How could somebody who says they love you hurt you so much? "Well, but son, he really wants to see you." "No, Dad, I don't want to see him." It was just a week later I learned that he died alone in the VA hospital. As I went to the funeral, I realized I got very emotional, and I thought maybe I should have gone to visit him. But as I told you earlier, I got out of high school and went into college, and I joined ROTC, just like my dad and my Uncle Charles. My senior year, I was in charge of a whole group of cadets, and I got to pick a service project, and I thought, let's go to the VA hospital and pay our respects to the veterans. So we all got in our uniforms, and each one of us was assigned a different vet. Mine was from World War I, and he told me all about what he had done and how he had been all over, and eventually it was time for me to go. And before I left, he put his arm on me, his hand on my arm, and he said, "Son, I want to thank you for coming to visit me. Nobody in my family's come to visit me, and well, your visit really meant a lot." Oh, when I got home in my little second-story efficiency apartment, I started thinking about my Uncle Charles, and I started to tear up. And I just said it out loud. I said, "Uncle Charles, I'm so sorry I didn't come to visit you when you were in the hospital. I love you, Uncle Charles. Will you forgive me?" And right then, the buzzer to my apartment rang. Well, I walked over and I looked down. I didn't see anybody at the door, but there was a slight overhang, and I thought, well, maybe they're hiding under the overhang. So I walked down the stairs, and when I got there, it was a glass door, and I could see, well, there's nobody there. But I went ahead and I opened it up, and when I opened it up, I looked down, and I couldn't believe what I saw on the mat. I couldn't believe it. I reached down, and I picked it up. It was a brass sheep bell that was identical to the one my Uncle Charles had given me and that I had lost. Chills went down my spine. I walked out into the alley and I said, "Who's there? Who's there? Who gave that to me?" And then I looked up and I realized it was a message from my Uncle Charles. He had forgiven me. He loved me. "We're poor little lambs who have lost our way. Ba, ba, ba." In your life, who is your Uncle Charles? And if you could talk with him right now, what would you say? You see, this bell, it represents to me a sacred bridge. Whenever I ring it, it's like a message to an unseen shepherd who can bring a message of hope and healing. As I ring this today, I want to invite each of you to share that message with that person. And I want you to just think about that. Now's your time to connect. You see, we are all lost little lambs and sheep. And this bell, it can help bring a message of healing and hope. Now is your time to connect. Now is your time for healing. Thank you.
Morning. The coughing Irish storyteller here. Today is Mother's Day in Ireland and England. So I wish any mothers here a very happy Mother's Day. The one person I would connect with, of course, would be my own mother, who we lost quite a long time ago. But I always think of her every day, but today especially. So do you know what Tuesday is? St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day. Say it out loud. Not St. Paddy's Day. Certainly not St. Patty's Day, which is really insulting. So it's St. Patrick's Day. So I thought I'd share a couple of stories about our patron saint. Now, you know, of course, he wasn't Irish. You know that. He was kidnapped, we think, from Wales and brought over to Ireland. He was brought as a slave. And actually, it's really funny, if you come to visit me, as you're driving into our big town, 12 miles away, you can see the mountain. And he was there as a slave on the slopes of that mountain. Now, by your standards, it's not a mountain, it's more like a pimple. It's what you call a volcanic plug, what was left after a volcano. So he was there, and he was looking after not sheep, but I love that song, I know that song off by heart. He looked after pigs. Then he escaped. He went to France, got religion, came back to convert the natives. So that's Patrick. Now, in Ireland, especially in Northern Ireland, we have a very strong tradition of recitation. So apologies to our interpreter, because this is going to rattle on as a poem. We would have always stood up to do your party piece. Did you have to do that sometimes? You had to stand up and say, it could be the boy stood on the burning deck or whatever. But we had a man years ago, he's gone about 20 years, called Crawford Howard. And all during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, euphemistically we call it the Troubles, he liked to do stories that managed to hit both sides, Protestant and Catholic. And he wrote this poem about St. Patrick. And I told it for years and years and years, but the best reception I ever got was when I was in a little village called Cumber. I do a lot of charity gigs. I was doing it for cancer research, and I never even thought about where I was. It was County Down until I got to a particular bit in the story. I was doing a thing in a Presbyterian church, so I thought this is a good story to tell you today. You ready? I'll try not to go too fast. You've heard of the snakes in Australia. You've likely heard of the snakes in Japan. You've heard of the rattler, that old Texas battler whose bite can mean death to a man. They've even got snakes in Old England. Nasty adders, all yellow and black. But in Erin's Green Isle, we can say with a smile, they're away. They're not coming back. Now, years ago, things were quite different. There were serpents all over the place. If you climbed up a ladder, you might meet an adder, or a cobra might lap at your face. If you went for a walk up the Shankill or dander along Sandy Row, a flaming great python would likely come writhing and take a lump out of your toe. Then along came a man called St. Patrick, a preacher of fame and renown. He hoisted his sails, he came over from Wales to convert all the heathens in Down. And he hurtled about through the country with a cloak, a big pointy hat, kept a few sheep that he sold on the cheap. There's no money in that. He was preaching a sermon in Cumber. He was getting quite carried away. And he mentioned that Rome had once been his home, and that was the wrong thing to say. For he felt a sharp pain on his cheekbone. He stuck up a hand till his beak, and the thing that had lit on his gobbin and bit was a wee Presbyterian snake. The snake slithered down from the pulpit, expecting St. Patrick to die. Your man was no dozer. He lifted his crozier and he belted the snake in the eye. And he said to the snake, listen, legless, you better just take yourself off. If you think that that trick will work with St. Patrick, you must be far worse than you're daft. Sorry about this. The snake slithered home in a temper. He gathered his friends all around. He said, listen, mates, time we got on our skates. I reckon it's time to leave town. It's no fun when you bite a big geezer, you sit back, you expect him to die, but he's not blooming quick with that big pointy stick that he hits you a dig in the eye. So a strange sight confronted St. Patrick. When he went out the very next day, snakes with long faces were all packing their cases, heading for Donegal Quay. Some got on cheap flights to Mallorca. Others booked apartments in Spain. They were all heading out, and there wasn't a doubt they weren't coming back there again. So the reason the snakes all left Ireland, this is no word of a lie, they all went to places to bite people's faces and be reasonably sure that they'd die. And the old snakes still caution their grandsons, for heaven's sake, beware of St. Pat. Take yourselves off if you see his big staff, or his cloak, or his big pointy hat. Crawford Howard, thank you. Thank you. Anyway, I get stories from all sorts of places. As I said yesterday, I like always to acknowledge where I get the stories from. So I was telling, this is the strangest story, telling stories one night in Belfast for an organisation called the British Council. They have visiting people come. And I met a man from Uzbekistan. That's a good word, isn't it? He came from Tashkent. And we're still friends. We're social media friends now. And he told me this story about St. Patrick. And I said, where, under goodness, did you get that story? He said, it was in a Russian textbook. When we were at school in Uzbekistan, we were under Russian rule at that time. And I thought, So I'm bringing you a story that I got in Belfast from a man from Uzbekistan who got it from a Russian textbook, and here we are in Texas. Storytelling, the original World Wide Web. Here we go. There was once a king in Ireland, and he had 3 sons, and they were the worst boys ever, because their daddy was the king, their mother was the queen. They could do pretty much anything they wanted. But one day, they were walking past the house of the Black Druid, the wizard, when they picked up stones and started throwing them at his roof. Not something you should do. The Black Druid was incensed with anger. He came to the palace and he said to the king, I am going to curse your 3 sons. Your first son, when he grows up, will always be seen with a knife in his hand. Your second son, when he grows up, will always be in the company of criminals, thieves, even murderers. Your third son, he's going to be begging for a living. With that, the High Queen gave a sigh, collapsed and took to her bed, and 3 black crows came and landed on her windowsill. Well, of course, the king sent for doctors, every doctor in the land. Nobody could find out what was wrong with his wife. She was in severe shock. But then he heard about this man called Patrick. He was making a name for himself, going about the world, doing all sorts of strange conversions, you know. So they called him in. They told him the story just the way I've told you people. Can you tell us what to do? Patrick was very wise. He said, yes. When your first son grows up, send him to be educated as a doctor, and he will cure people with the skills of a surgeon's knife. With that, one of the crows flew away. Your second son, when he grows up, have him educated as a lawyer, and he will spend his time dispensing justice to criminals, thieves, even murderers. Second crow flew away. Your third son, he's destined to be an artist, probably a storyteller, and he'll spend all his life going around the world begging for a living. With that, the third crow flew away, the queen recovered, and when the boys grew up, the king followed Patrick's advice, and everybody agreed he was a very smart man. Ooh, that's it. But it's not an unusual story, and I'm giving it to you because it's nice to have what I call pocket stories. It's very easy to remember. You only have to hear it once. I only heard it once, and there you go. I've been telling it ever since, and I'm still in touch with the man who gave it to me. So one last story. I try and fit in as many stories as I can in 15 minutes, you know. This story, Sue asked me to tell it. Is she there? And she is. As some of you know, when COVID struck, well, it was bad. I live in the middle of nowhere. The nearest store is, 2 miles away. There was just me there, all by my own self. No travel in the world, none of that. I adopted a beautiful old German Shepherd dog who was thrown out the car door by my daughter on a long lead. She wouldn't even come near me, right? So Eric and I were there, and I started Zooming. And the story I'm going to tell you is a story that helped me, because mental health's a thing, loneliness is a really tough thing. And I want you to keep this story, tell it to anybody you come across, because I love it. I heard this version. It was in a book of stories collected in Northern Ireland, but I've seen a version in a Vietnamese folktale book, which just shows you stories all around the world. A farmer and his wife lived in a small hill farm in the glens of Antrim, where I live. Everything was going wrong. The hens were off the lay. The cow wasn't given the proper yield of milk. The fences were broken down, and the man was depressed. Though in those days you wouldn't have used the word depression, I'm glad we can use it now. That man was, we would say, he wasn't at himself. That's from the Irish, he just wasn't himself. He and his wife were sitting one day in the middle of the day having their dinner, because in the olden days dinner used to be in the middle of the day, supper was at night. They were having their dinner when the door opened and an old tramp man walked in. And again, that was the time where you didn't have to lock your doors. Men and women of the road would come, they would fix your pots and pans, they would do jobs, and you'd always offer them hospitality. All they had in front of them was potatoes and buttermilk, but of course, they shared what they had. And over the course of the meal, they told him all the things that were going wrong, the hens, the cow, everything. And he said, I might be able to help you. And they looked at this old man and they, how could he help us? And his rags. And out from his jacket, he brought a lump of gold. He said, that might help. They went, what? They were so busy looking at it, they didn't notice he left. And the man said, what are we going to do with this? And his wife said, bury it. And that was the time when there used to be earthen floors. My own house had an earthen floor when I bought it, with just tiles over it. So they buried it. She said, will we get another cow? Not at all. He said, that cow's a great milker. What about getting you more hens? Oh, she said, those hens on nothing. I know. She said, we need to repair the fences. We need paint. He said, listen, I've got the paint. I've got the fence posts. I just never got round to it. So they talked. And the wonderful thing is, about a story is you can say time passed. A whole year went past. And the old tramp man turned up again. Rooster crowing, new calf in the field, place all painted up, beautiful barge board. This time, meat and 2 veg. Oh, they welcomed that long lost friend. They sat him down, they piled his plate. He said, you're doing well. Oh yes, he said, we're doing well. All thanks to you. All right, all thanks to you. He said, what did you spend the gold on? And a look passed between them. He said, to tell you the truth, we didn't spend it at all. It's still buried there where we left it. All we needed was a little bit of a lift from you, a little bit of encouragement from you. And the old man said, do you mind if I take the gold? Because maybe the next place I go, somebody there will want a wee bit of a lift. And isn't that how it is for all of us, ladies and gentlemen? Sometimes it's not somebody telling you about what grant you can get. It's somebody phoning you up and saying, meet you for breakfast, give you a call, sure I'll call you next week. Are you coming to the Storytelling Festival? So that's why I love that story. It's called A Wee Lift. Thank you very much indeed.
So, for those of you who are familiar with us, we're taking a brief break for 2 things, and then we'll finish up with our last storyteller. This year, we've had some big losses in the community, and I'd like us all to just share a moment of silence to respect the loss of those lives of people who have played a significant role in the lives of storytellers in Texas. Those people are Lee J. Capps, Leslie Bowie, Lynn Maroney, Mark Wieland, David Brock, Doug Lipman, and I discovered this morning that another name needed to go on that list. Della Falls Noble Bennett. Thank you. And now another explanation. It's a tradition to have the passing of the basket. I'm sure a lot of you have been in churches and special events where they had the passing of the basket. Well, our passing of the basket is just a little bit different. Instead of asking you to put something in it, we ask you to take something out. Something to help remind you of your time spent in this concert. And I always have so much fun trying to decide what it is we're going to pass out for that year. And this year, Stephen was the inspiration. Stephen does games. One of the most beautiful ways of bringing people together is games. Brings families together, brings friends together. And the game I picked to share today with y'all can bring a nation together. So I opted to pass out a game that is so much fun. And it comes from a group of people who knows how to take an American game and make it way more colorful. So I chose the Lotteria. So as they begin to pass out the cards, please just reach out and pick one. And if there's one you look at and you go, oh no, you're welcome to swap it out and try your luck again. Because I'm not quite sure how many of you want El Diablo. Although I think my husband Gene would say, well, that one's perfect for you. Okay. So, our last story for tonight, or today. I'm especially excited to bring Amy Martin up now because she has brought Jean and I up on stage so many times. It's such a treat to bring her on stage.
On the snake, it looks like. Hi there. I'm going to be a little different. And I apologize for having to use crib notes. It's been one heck of a week. I just didn't have time to get this memorized. You know, I just wanted to have sex on the beach. My husband and I were on a much-needed vacation in Playa del Carmen, which is on the Yucatan coast of Mexico. And we were walking down the shore to the gay beach, because that's where we were told that you go for a little bit of midnight hanky-panky. The full moon, it was intense. And I was completely mesmerized by the moonlight merging through the still water and reflecting back up off the sandy bottom, the light made this fluid, silvery web that pulsated, and it was hypnotic. I had to be a part of it. And so I walked out into the ocean to get closer. And my husband began saying, "Amy, Amy, Amy, what are you doing?" I ignored him. And then I turned and I looked up the beach where we had come from, and everything was gone. The hotel, the buildings, everything. There was nothing but palm trees and women. Dozens and dozens of brown-skinned women. And beyond them were these really large canoes, and they were filled with women, and there were men at the helm oaring them all over to the island of Cozumel. Well, I kind of faintly remember, it was just a rip in time. Time just ripped open. It felt so ancient. And my face was mere inches from the ocean surface at this time. And my husband was alarmed. He's like, "You are going to drown." So I turned back to the beach, and I sat on the sand. And I wasn't really all that happy to be back in present time. Faintly, I remembered something from my travel materials about the Mayan goddess Ixchel, and she was associated with this part of the Yucatan. And she was in charge of the moon and the ocean, but really I'd not given her any thought at all, but I realized that what I saw, it had something to do with her. So I drew a circle in the wet sand, and I drew crescent moons all around that circle. And I wrote her name in the middle, Ixchel, which is spelled Ixchel. And I was still too stunned to really go further, do much of anything. So my husband guided me back to the hotel, frankly disappointed. Ixchel came to me many times during that vacation, always unexpected. I'd be looking out the window at the moon, and I'd hear her song. And I was swimming in the ocean, and I felt the vibrations of her song coming out, emanating from the depths. I began to yearn for whatever this Ixchel thing was. So we took a shuttle boat over to Cozumel's port town, and then a taxi to her ruins in the middle of the island. As I wandered around these weathered limestone ruins that had been racked by many hurricanes over the centuries, I was once again flung back in time. Women chanting and dancing in circles and blowing on conch shells and immersed in swirling clouds of copal incense. They sang to her, and she sang back, and meanwhile her spirit animal, the swallow, was flying around in the sky. On my return to Dallas, I do what journalists do. I researched, combing through archaeological and history books. I became an expert on Ixchel, and she stopped singing to me. A few years later, I was invited to be an Ixchel expert at a retreat for Mesoamerican goddesses put on by a couple of Catholic nuns. And it was being held on the week of the Virgin of Guadalupe Day, which is December 13th. And there was such a sense of the sacred that permeated everything in Mexico. People they make pilgrimages from all over the country to go to her basilica in Mexico City. So the retreat was women, there was about 24 of us. We gathered in the tiny fishing town of Puerto Morales. And we could fill it there. And that is halfway in between Playa del Carmen, the route to Cozumel, and Isla Mujeres, the island of women. And I gave my learned spiel, and it was well received. So wandering around the beach that night, I stopped to admire we met in this palapa, this thatched roof, open-sided thing, and I decided that I would go and I would look at the altar, that was there. And it was bedecked with images of the Virgin of Guadalupe and statues of Ixchel and others from Mesoamerica, the southern part of Mexico. And I sat down before it, cross-legged, and, had a look. After a few minutes, though, my head began being pulled down to the ground until I was completely folded over. It was really kind of hard to breathe. And I realized that I didn't have control over my body anymore. I couldn't sit upright. My face was almost on the floor. And I heard a voice. "We have to talk about your mother." I was stunned. I've had mystical moments with the divine, but never has one tried to have a conversation with me in English. And I'm in Mexico. And I was so stunned, I didn't answer, and this obviously displeased her. And my head was yanked downward, and I was clipped my chin off the floor. Again, "We have to talk about your mother." Oh, no, not my mother. And she'd been dead 8 years. We split over my remembering on a winter solstice day when a totally confusing tsunami of memory fragments somehow broke through. And I told her the day after that these images made, celebrating Christmas with the family really uncomfortable. Her reply, "I knew there was incest. That's why I left. You children were out of control, and your father wouldn't do anything." Oh, I would spend years in therapy unpacking those sentences right there. So I emerged from the abyss that this realization threw me into. And I discovered that my brother was on his second grand jury indictment for sexual crimes against his underage gymnastics students. And the frangible memories were clear. He started his predation with me. I never saw my parents again. So the Virgin statue stared without pity. A phantom hand turned my head to the right. A presence, a vague org, sort of a spot that was spinning, that was invisible but visible. It was ethereal, but it had a bit of weight to it. And it was there spinning in space. It was my mother as a soul, not as a human with all the flaws that a human can have. You and her have a relationship you cannot escape, said the Virgin. She placed you in the web. She was the soul that created my soul. I had to love her completely. This spinning luminescence was not the twisted mother I knew. She seemed impatient, as if she had been waiting all of these years for me to figure this out, as if my resentment was holding her soul prisoner. I had a dream about my mother a few months after she passed. I paced down a long hall, and at the end was a dimly lit room with my mother in a bed, looking frail. Deathbed, obviously. And I leaned over and I held her face in my hands. She said, "I love you." I was aghast. That was not what I wanted to hear. Why didn't she say she was sorry? Why didn't she apologize that she didn't protect me, that she looked the other way from me and all of those girls, those gymnastics students? And I responded with what I had hoped to say in return. "I forgive you. Dream over." At the palapa on the Mexican beach, the Virgin made it quite clear that I could not write heartfelt about mother goddesses like Ishel when I wasn't at peace with my own. I shrieked from my soul, I love you, I love you. After 8 years, I finally got the response right. I keened I love you for what seemed like hours, rocking back and forth, screaming what seemed like from the top of my lungs. My weeping stilled to a whisper. The hotel rooms nearby had open windows, but nobody stirred. My head again was forced to turn to the right. My mother, as a spinning soul, was still there. My heart broke open. The Virgin released her hold on me, and I sat up. My mother's energy just raced around me, and then she was gone, off into the universe. She was free, and so was I. But I still couldn't move from my spot. And there was the Virgin still staring at me. She clearly thought that I had not come with enough respect for her, and she was right. It was all hubris. I am the portal for the deeper mysteries of Ishel. Only through her, only through me, can you pass on to her. Christianity's intimacy with the divine, the faith that tells us that we too are sacred. Again, my head was turned for me, but this time to the left. And there was the statue of Ishel, just spinning in luminosity like the Virgin. All this time, Ishel had been there. I was in her presence, not the glancing view of how I encountered her on the beach and other places. This was deeper. And this goddess, she too was conversational, but by now I'm stunned by nothing, you know. She'd say something profound, and I would think, this is it. This is the ultimate. And the journalist part of me, I was so desperate to find a piece of paper and a pen, you know, and I wanted to move. And it not happening. I was not being able to get up. So I submitted to her like I submitted to the Virgin, quietly rocking back and forth while she held court. I didn't try to remember. I didn't try anything. I was simply one with her words as they washed over me. Do you want to see the web? Everything changed. I was no longer in Palapa, immersed in an ethereal void. I rested in a fluid, silvery web, undulating, pulsating, and so very alive. Is this where souls go to rest? Like the ocean web of moonlight that mesmerized me on that Playa del Carmen beach, but infinite. I felt absorbed in it, accepted into the network of streaming energy, flowing endlessly in all directions. It was bliss, pure and simple, nirvana. I have no idea how long I was there. In a flash, though, back down on the ground in the Palapa. Well, that was the end of the experience. Ishel's presence started to subside. The specters faded back into their icons, and I made my way to the hotel room, mumbled a few things to my concerned, but still very irritating roommate, and fell immediately asleep. Late the next night, I looked out my hotel window. A woman in the Palapa was sitting in front of the altar, rocking back and forth. I wished her well and closed the curtains. I never heard a thing. Thanks for listening.
I'd like to thank our amazing tellers this morning. Liz Weir, Rebekah Garcia, Darci Tucker, Stephen Schwartz, and Amy Martin, and of course, our longtime amazing storytellers on the stage here are our signers, Lizzie and Joel. Thank you. So, let's show.
Thank you. Yes.
Art directors.